Welcome to Black Lodge Publishing's series of short introductory talks on esoteric and other occult subjects. This talk follows directly on from parts 1 and 2, and where I introduced the listener to the magical world of atavisms. In this, part 3 and the final talk, part 4, I want to present the practitioner with further insights into what atavisms are, but more importantly, how they can be magically activated by the practitioner. It has been well documented that Spare influenced Grant, but as Michael Staley has recently argued, Grant influenced Spare. And as he goes on to note, Grant may be considered the prime exponent of Spare's work. For Grant had known Spare until the latter's death in 1956, and it was Grant who inherited Spare's papers and manuscripts. From an excerpt in Kenneth Grant, Osman Spare, A Study in Sorcery, an unpublished typescript, 1956, in a private collection, Spare's original belief, self, or that termed Kia, can be discovered by the mechanics of atavistic resurgence and the directing of the subconsciousness inwards and backwards to that primal region of Kia's initial fulguration. Spare's Zos Kia cultus is therefore the cult, or the interplay of dynamic forces which are further symbolized anthropomorphically by the hand and the eye. It is these in complete coordination that enables the artist-magician to summon hidden images which are latent in the storehouse of one's cosmic subconsciousness. For example, Spare's painted stelae often utilize particular atavisms which have been realized through activating subconscious iconography, and indeed where they can then take on much greater magical potentiality. In saying this, it is of particular interest to my own studies, partly because many of Grant and Spare's references are those developed from transformed subconscious atavistic memories and which are themselves derived from more powerful Egyptian sources. Grant and Spare recognise that the all-feeling touch and all-seeing vision are the instruments of that primal id, or one's desire, and which Zos, or of the self, is ever seeking to reify in the clothing of flesh, corporeality. Thus, in this manner, it is not dissimilar to that of scrying on the duatic tides and exploring the gates of the Egyptian netherworld, whilst one is embodied. For using magical techniques like these, we can then enter into our own subconscious reservoir of thoughts, and then by consciously evoking those deep-rooted atavistic thought forms, we can then project them through creative esotericism into more recognizable media, and wherefrom they truly become more corporeal in form. Thus, and in praxis, some see a useful analogy in the four Kabbalistic universes, especially in that of the world of corporeality, Asiya, or world of physical making. It is therefore an act involving the interplay between mind and body, wherein the atavisms are then projected through physical activities, such as that of writing, artwork, music, dance, and even practical alchemy. Consequently, Spare and Grant provide some good clues of how one dislimbs and can then engage in those early pre-human stages of consciousness by activating genetic or that of hereditary memory. Yet, this is not an end in itself, for the basic premise is that our greatest magical power, and probably even the source of magic itself, does in fact lie hidden in these early stages of evolution, and thus they can in fact be invoked through atavistic resurgence. Nonetheless, this type of magical or esoteric creativity does indeed have a long history and can also be confirmed from the practices associated with early African fetish magicians, Siberian and northern shamans, and indeed from those who in general work with power animals, clan or cult totems. Yet, however, we can also see it flooding ancient imagery, and where the best example is in that of hieroglyphics, and as Grant rightly points out, these are one of the earliest forms of sigils. We also find evidence of its use in alchemy, and where the iconography is comparable to that reproduced through tarot designs, and partly that through atavistic resurgence being creatively merged with various glyphs and other forms of iconography. However, and here we now reach the heart of the matter, in that according to Grant, Zoss's basic theory that all dream or desire, all wish or belief, anything in fact which a person nurtures in one's most inmost being, may be called forth in the flesh as a living truth by a particular method of magical evocation. And it was this he then named atavistic resurgence. It is a method of wish fulfillment, which involves the interaction of will, desire and belief. For in Grant's Against the Light, page 66, where his main character, himself named Kenneth Grant, recalls an episode where Black Eagle was singing through the melting flesh the song once heard by Osman Spare, by Gregor Grant and by Aleister Crowley. And the gist of the song was that when the gates are wide open, the unwary will topple into the tunnels of Set. And if they know not the sign of protection, and if they are not versed in the art of banishing spirits, they may stray in the tunnels until they are swept out of earshot of the word of the aeon, which is a dire calamity. For the word is due to change around the year 2000. Those in the tunnels will not hear it. They will be flushed out of the terrestrial system into the lower sinks beneath Malkuth. The way of evolution along the traditional paths which lead humanity to the threshold of the abyss will be disrupted by a premature resurgence of ancient atavisms, which humanity in the mass will be unable to control. Uncle Finn told me that this resurgence could be caused by radioactive bombardment from outside, aided by human folly. Already, he explained, the forces from the other side are seeping into the waking state of humanity in the form of UFOs, of monsters or moon stars, and of terrifying nightmares experienced by sensitives in all parts of the world. The counterflow of these forces will inevitably occur with devastating consequences for those unprepared to deal with the tenants of the tunnels. Magical praxis confirms this episode, for only when the magical will, which Spare is fond of calling belief, has become organic, meaning unconscious and carnal, is it, according to Spare, most effective. For as Grant notes, the deeper we go into our magical trance and returning to earlier stages of consciousness, the easier it is for us to partake of its magic power and, most important, to direct and use it. Therefore, for both Grant and Spare, what we seek to engage in is a process that can produce that of a magical form by means of esoteric creativity. However, as Grant warns us in, for example, Against the Light, page 67, and where Dr. Phineas Black infects Grant with the full appalling effect of horror engendered through this dark knowledge, Grant asks Phineas to explain. His eyes wandered from the electric rings. He shot me a glance of mingled suspicion and despair, telling Grant that many sensitive people today are experiencing violent inner convulsions due to a reawakening of the ancient atavisms. They are being sucked behind the tree of life from almost any point upon it. I'm sure the listener will make up his or her own mind as to who and what the episode refers. One esoteric formula for using atavisms can be related to the activation of sigils, and where we are informed that any wish may be given symbolic form. However, some suggest that in this case the form should bear no pictorial approximation to that particular desire in question. Hence it becomes what in magic we might term a sentient symbol, that is, a glyph representing that of an activated sigil. By magical means, the symbol has to be implanted in the subconscious, there to await ultimate extrusion as reified fact, after having bypassed the conscious censor and detracted all the necessary elements from the external world. But we can ask further, how is this done? Well, Zoss provides three methods of awakening the subconscious memory strata. 1. the system of sigils, 2, the alphabet of desire, and 3, the use of sentient symbols. Or one can use the clues provided by Grant in his Typhonian research into that of Crowley's Liber 231. I will leave today's offerings for practitioners to further their own choice of readings, research, and indeed that of their own methodological practice relating to a more creative form of esotericism. My own particular use of atavistic resurgence and the duatic tide uses the glyphs and iconography found in my books The Flesh of Ra and The Chamber of Darkness. In the final lecture of this short introductory series, I will draw together and present my final thoughts on Kenneth Grant's magical use of atavistic resurgence. So again, many thanks for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed the 3 talks so far. Please subscribe to BLP on Facebook and also here on YouTube to hear my final talk on atavistic resurgence.